Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming in tonight. It's a really nice night out, so I appreciate it even more that you're taking time out to come in and hear what we have to tell you about air testing. Let me introduce myself. I'm new to the building, so most people don't know who I am, but my name's Yvonne Edwards, and I'm one of the assistant principals here at the high school. And my testing partner guru over here is Julie Smeagol. She's a counselor in the building. So we're both going to be talking with you tonight. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about tonight is the reason why we even need to have a meeting at all, and that is because there have been some big changes over the last few years about graduation requirements here in the state of Ohio. For a very long time, teachers and students have been hearing about the OGT, the Ohio Graduation Test. When I first started teaching in 1997, there was the 9th grade proficiency test. And then a few years into my career, it changed over to the OGT. And so we're in this weird situation in the building right now where we literally have two different sets of graduation requirements. The juniors and the seniors are still under the OGT. So if the juniors were 10th graders last year, if they did not pass the OGT, they still need to pass the OGT. And we'll be administering that here in the building in about 3 weeks. So they're still subject to the OGT. So last year was the first year of the Ohio State tests. And you hear that word floating around, PARC, and you hear air, and you hear state tests, and they all kind of blend together. And so it gets very confusing. PARC and air are the writers of the tests. But the tests altogether are called the Ohio State tests. And we're going to talk on the next slide about what the tests actually are. Last year was super confusing. I think it's always confusing the first year of anything in education. But it was super confusing because we had PARC tests and we had air tests. And we had two different administrations. We had the PBA, the performance-based assessments that went on in February and in March, and they also, for everyone, were thrown in with all these calamity days and so forth. And then the end of course exams, which are also sometimes called the end of year exams, they happened in April and in May. And in both of those administrations, you had PARC tests, you had air tests. The PARC tests were English and math, and the air tests were science and social studies. It's just that we had two different companies that were writing the tests for us. But they're all Ohio State tests. So the PARC test proved to be problematic. The platform online was very difficult to use, and there were a lot of complaints about the system. So the state of Ohio got rid of the PARC test, and all we have this year are the air tests. The subject areas tested, for the most part, and we'll get to that in a minute, have stayed the same, but they're all air tests, and they wrote what are the Ohio State tests. So the reason that the state decided to get rid of the OGT and to move into these Ohio State tests that are given at the 9th grade level, the 10th grade level, some 11th graders actually take tests, and then they're also at the 12th grade level, instead of just this straight across the board 9th or 10th grade test, is because, for a while now, these conversations have gone on between K through 12 educators and our colleges in the country and with corporate America. And what universities are saying and what corporate America is saying is that there are certain skills that we're not finding that young people have. And some of them are listed up there on the PowerPoint for you, but problem solving, critical thinking, communication, whether it's oral or written, those are skills that are consistently identified as skills that we need to develop more in students, hopefully at the K through 12 level. And so that's what they're trying to accomplish with those tests, and that's why the changes came about. So the tests are harder, and the students, let that be known last year. They are more difficult, but there's a reason why they are more difficult. It's to try to make sure that we have college and work readiness skills in these kids in the K through 12 area, so that they're ready to get out there in the world and to be successful. So what are the subjects that are tested? They're not that different than what was tested for the OGT. In some cases, they're more specific. There was a science OGT, but we have a more specific test with the Ohio State test, which goes straight to biology. But at the 9th grade level, English 9 is tested, Algebra 1 or geometry. With math, it gets kind of tricky, and this is where typically you see the progression of math testing, is that usually you have a 9th grader taking algebra, and usually you have a 10th grader taking geometry. But that's not always the case because math is very difficult for some students. So we break it down for them. You know, some students even take Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. And in that case, for the class of 2018, if your son or daughter took Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, they never had the opportunity to take this test. And so what happens is we look at their transcript and we give them a score of 1 to 5 based upon their grade, because we don't want them to just miss out on that opportunity of those 5 points. So if they got an A, they get a 5. If they got a B in Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, they get a 4. If they got a C, they get a 3, and so on down. But like I was saying before, math can be very hard for some students. So we have students that take the full year of algebra in the 9th grade, and then we have some that take what's called Algebra AB, and then they take Algebra CD, the second half, in the 10th grade. And at the end of that class, when they're completely done with algebra, they will take the Algebra 1 test. So some students won't actually take the Algebra 1 test until the 10th grade. So it depends on their progression through algebra and geometry. When I was in high school, I was so bad at math, I would have taken Algebra A in the 9th grade, Algebra B in the 10th grade, and I wouldn't have gotten to the Algebra 1 test until I was a senior. So it depends on your students' abilities in math, exactly when they're going to fall, when they're going to take that Algebra 1 and that geometry test. But in the 9th grade, typically, you're going to have them taking their English test, their math test, and if they take biology in the 9th grade, most of our students take biology in the 10th grade, but some of them do take it in the 9th grade. We have 3 sections at Ferguson Hall of biology. So if they're in it now, they will take it here in a couple of months, and we start testing on April 11th. So they go through that, and then in the 10th grade, they're going to take English 10. They're going to take their level of math. Like I said, most kids take biology in the 10th grade, so they're going to take it then, and they're going to take the American history test. Now, I figured out that we needed to have this meeting when I sent home a letter to all the 10th grade parents that said you need to make a decision about your child's science test. And even if after tonight you change your mind about that answer, you know, we can still accommodate that. But I didn't mean to scare anyone, but the good part of sending out that letter and realizing there was a lot of confusion is that we realized we needed to have this meeting. So what's happening is that last year the 9th graders took the physical science test. It was an air test because it was science. And the state decided they wanted to get rid of physical science and test them in biology instead. So just for the class of 2018, current sophomores, they have a choice about science. If they passed the physical science test, if they were proficient, which is a 3, Mrs. Spiegel is going to talk to you more about what the 1 through 5 means, then they're good to go. They have their science score. But they're in bio right now, and there is a bio test. So if you choose, they can take that bio test, and if they got a 3 on the physical science, but they get a 4 or 5 on the bio, then they take that 4 or that 5. They can improve their score. And if your son or daughter did not pass the physical science test, if they weren't proficient, if they got a 1 or a 2, they have a choice. They can retake the physical science test, or they can take the biology test. What I would strongly suggest is that you have them take the biology test, because they're in a biology class right now. And the system, this Ohio State system, does always offer students the ability to retake tests that they weren't proficient in, but it requires every single time that we provide remediation, that we provide tutoring to the student, 10 hours of that tutoring. If they weren't proficient the first time, they're probably not going to be proficient the second time unless we give them some help. That's the theory behind it, and I think we would agree with that. So if you wanted them to go back and take the physical science, they would have to go through 10 hours of remediation. And they're in bio now, so that's why we suggest that they stick with the biology. So at the 10th grade, clearly you have the most testing going on for most students. So you have English, math, biology. This year, the class of 2008, we probably aren't going to have a lot of kids taking the biology test, but if your child is a freshman, they're all going to be taking the biology test next year and from all the years after that. And then they will take the American history. Our 12th graders will be taking the government test. That test, for our current seniors, they're still under the OGT. So that's where things get weird and confusing in the building. They're taking the American government test. It's a field test still. It doesn't count. It's helping AIR to put together a really good test. They look at how students are doing. We go ahead and give it, and they're tweaking the test to make it the best test that they possibly can. Okay, so Mrs. Smeagol is going to talk to you about what this 1 to 5 score range means, and she's going to talk to you about raw scores and the 18-point system.
Okay, so on your sheet you have like a thing that says performance level and graduation points. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if your child receives a score of a 1, it's considered to be a limited. A score of a 2 is basic. 3 is proficient, 4 is accelerated, and 5 is advanced. So any score of proficient or 3 or above is considered passing in that regard. As you can see, right below that, it says students in the class of 2018 that Mrs. Edwards had mentioned earlier. If they took Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, they'll be getting a score based on their transcripted grade. That'll actually go for the kids that are sophomores right now that took biology as a freshman last year. Because last year the biology test wasn't available, so we will take their transcripted grade from biology as a 9th grader, and they will receive a score based on that grade, and you can see how that works on your sheet there. So that's how that works. And then when you receive your score report, some of you may have already been through this before, it will tell you what your child received on like a scale, and it'll tell you kind of where they sit on a scale from, accelerated down to limited, or advanced down to limited. But this is what it looked like in the spring of 2015 as far as scaled scores and where they fall. So if your child received, let's say they took physical science last year and they got a 705, you can see that they scored proficient with a score of a 3 on there. So this is subject to change, as Mrs. Edwards said, as they continue to give these tests year after year. They're going to be developing, kids are going to be adapting to it, teachers are going to have more practice materials, that kind of thing. They may change the scaled scores as people are adapted to the test to make it more, I don't want to say difficult to get a certain score, but they may change in the future.
So the kid might be proficient this year, but change that and is not proficient the next year?
What we're saying is like basically, like let's say for example like the geometry test last year, the first time they gave it, it may be 650 to 699 last year, and then next year it may be
But if I'm considered proficient on that schedule right now,
mm-hmm.
I'm not going to.
It'll always be proficient.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So I would just it'll explain it on your score reports if they change. Excuse me?
That's basically last year's spring.
Last year's in spring of 2015. Yep. So this is basically just an example of what that looked like. As far as where the scores fall. So it'll tell you, it won't tell you on your score report if your child received a 1 through a 5. So that's where you need to be familiar with, like if they received a proficient score, it's going to be a 3. So that's just kind of how you can add up your points. Okay, what the points mean in the grand scheme of things, it's for graduation points. So 18 is the big number, and there's some other like limits that you have to hit, some minimums that you have to hit within those 18. So between the 2 English tests, the English 9 and English 10 tests, they have to earn at least 4 points. Between the 2 math tests, the Algebra 1 and Geometry tests, they have to also receive 4 points. And then between the science, so either physical science or biology, and the 2 history tests, history and government tests, they have to earn a minimum of 6 points. So as you can see, as long as each area they're scoring at least a 2 on all those tests, they're hitting the minimums. And if a student earned a 2 on every single test all through, that's 7 tests times 2, that's 14 points. So you can see they need to make up some points in other areas. And the good thing about this is that it allows students to have strengths and weaknesses, whereas OGT, you had to be proficient in all areas. So, not every kid is a math kid. Some kids excel in English or excel in social studies, and they struggle in science and math, so they can earn their points in those areas, and it's better for them. So if you want to earn your 18 points, that's an average of a little over 2 per test, so you kind of know what to shoot for when you're looking at your kids' scores. And the other thing about the kids having the bulk of their tests their freshman and sophomore year is by the end of your sophomore year, you'll probably have at least 5 or 6 of your kid testing, 5 or 6 of the tests under your belt. So you'll be able to kind of gauge where they're at and decide, whoa, we better retake, biology, or we better retake geometry or something like that, and try to get more points in those areas. So there's plenty of time to retake. We do give the tests every spring and fall. So let's say you get your test scores in the summer and you decide, yeah, we better retake this particular test. You just contact us, we'll set you up with remediation for the fall. You can retake in the fall, again in the spring if you want, and just on and on until graduation. So.
And just adding on to what Mrs. Smeagol was just talking about, those of you here that have a son or daughter that was a freshman last year, when you received your family score reports, you may have found that they didn't do real well on one of the tests. They may have gotten a 1 or a 2. You don't want to get too concerned about that until you see how they do this year, because they may hit the minimum in that area and then really excel in other areas that bumps them up to their 18 points. So they need 18 points to graduate, and they have 35 possible points. And I think it's really a good thing that they're allowed to have an area that they're not so great at, and then their areas of strength really kind of pull them through. It kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, because like I said, when I started teaching in 1997 and we had these, these tests that you had to pass to graduate from high school, they weren't around when I graduated from high school, and I was really, really bad at math. And I always said to myself during proficiency week and during OGT week, I'm not sure I would have passed the math. And it's not that I'm not an intelligent person, it's just that my brain doesn't wrap around that stuff really well. But I was really good at social studies, and I was really good at some other subjects that would have gotten me through the system. So this is what our testing schedule is going to look like. The state testing window actually opens on April the 4th, but that's our first day back from spring break, and I think that this district has made a very wise choice in saying that we are not going to have kids come back from spring break and go straight into testing. That is not ideal. So we're going to have that week to get back and acclimate and get them used to getting up early again and back to the reality of school, and then we're going to go into this testing schedule. It's a pretty intensive schedule, I'm not going to lie about that. The state said they reduced testing, but really what they did is they reduced the testing window, because last year we had the PBA tests that were given February, March, and then end of course exams that were given April to early May, and they did get rid of that earlier set of testing, but what they did is they put it all in the same window. And they also shortened the window to 15 days. So once you start a test, it has to be done within 15 days. Last year it was 20. So this is what it looks like. The reason that it takes 4 days to get through a test is because every test has 2 parts. So we also, as a district, have made the decision that kids will only take 1 part in any given day. Some districts are giving 2 parts at a time, and we chose not to do that. The first test is the longest test. It's 2 parts. It's 105 minutes for each part, so that the students will spend more time testing. All of the other tests are 90 minutes, and they are 2 parts. So the English we're going to get that one done first because it is the longest test and get it out of the way. But they are all 2 parts. From the 19th to the 22nd, Ferguson Hall just has the math test going on, but here at the main building we have a lot of testing going on in those 4 days, and we have 10 testing sessions going 3 times a day for those 4 days so that we can get government and math out of the way. So that's really our most intensive time. Sometime in the very near future, our teachers are aware of the testing times, but I will be talking to them at a staff meeting, and I know that they will be very cooperative with this, but I'm going to reiterate to them that our students are going to have a very intense spring going on, and to be as flexible as they possibly can with assignments and major tests and major projects so that we can do all we can to help them get through the testing window. And this is also in the handout that we were giving people as they were coming in the building. So the dates are set in stone. They will not change unless something really major changes. So that's the way the testing window looks.